All right, welcome back to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
So this time we're diving into the English Fluency Show. We found this great episode, 10 Proven Methods to Improve Your English Skills Quickly. It's amazing how much they pack into just one episode. And whether you're learning English or just love language, I think there's some really good takeaways. Even for those who consider themselves fluent, I bet you'll find something useful here.
Definitely. They do a great job of just making it really accessible, breaking down some pretty complex ideas into like bite-sized pieces you can actually do something with.
Right, like their focus on immersion. They really emphasize that surrounding yourself with English is absolutely key. But it's more than just listening or reading, right? It's got to be active.
Right. And they give some really interesting examples of how to make it active, like switching your phone's language settings to English.
Oh, interesting.
I mean, think about it. How many times a day are you on your phone?
Oh, way too many.
Right. That's a ton of passive exposure you could be getting.
I have to admit, I stick to my native language on my phone. It's just comfortable. But I get their point. It's creating an environment where you're always bumping into English, even in little ways. Yeah. What about you? Have you ever tried changing your phone's language?
I actually did that when I was learning Italian.
Oh, wow.
It was a little strange at first, but honestly, I got used to it pretty quickly. And it really did help me learn new words without even realizing it.
That's amazing. It's like your brain's just working in the background, right?
Yeah.
Soaking it all up. But it's not just about our phones. It's about really looking for those chances to speak English, even if it feels a little scary.
Oh, absolutely. And the podcast hosts, they really challenge that whole wait until you're ready to speak idea. They're like, no, speaking, even with mistakes, is the best way to improve.
It makes sense. It's like anything else, you get better by doing it. They even mentioned narrating your everyday activities in English. Have you tried that?
I haven't done the full narration thing, but I do find that talking to myself in English, even just for a few minutes a day, really helps me get more comfortable forming sentences, just getting those thoughts out. It's like a practice run for conversations.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's all about building that fluency and confidence. And speaking of confidence, I like how they emphasize that mistakes are part of the process. They're not something to be afraid of.
Yeah, they're big on that. They argue that getting hung up on being perfect can actually hold you back. It's more important to just get the words out there, keep practicing.
It makes me think about learning any new skill, really. You don't become an expert overnight. You can, make those mistakes and learn from them. But how do we get over that fear of messing up, especially in a new language?
They have some good thoughts on that, but I think that leads us nicely to their next point, vocabulary. It's a bit of a chicken and egg situation, right? You need words to speak, but you also learn words by speaking.
So true. Everything's connected. And they seem to really favor learning new words in context, not just memorizing lists.
Exactly. They suggest things like keeping a journal in English, focusing on actually using those new words you encounter each day.
Sounds a bit like your Italian phone trick. It's all about making those words stick by putting them into practice. But what about those times when you come across a word you just don't know? What are your strategies?
Well, the podcast actually has some helpful advice on that, too. They really stress active listening, which, when you think about it, connects back to speaking practice A&D vocabulary building.
Oh, I like that. Seeing a theme here. It's not just a bunch of random tips. It's more of a holistic approach, right?
Definitely. And when we talk about active listening, they're not just talking about passively hearing English. It's about engaging with it actively.
So more than just having it on in the background.
Way more. It's about really paying attention to the pronunciation, identifying new phrases, and even summarizing what you've heard.
I see. Makes sense. You're making your brain work harder to process it all. But how do we turn active listening into a habit? It's so easy to just zone out, especially with so much content available.
Well, the podcast mentions a technique called shadowing, which I think could really help develop those active listening skills. Basically, you listen to a native speaker and then immediately repeat what they said.
So you're kind of like mimicking them.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting. But wouldn't that just focus on pronunciation? How does it tie back to understanding?
Right, but to do it well, you really have to be tuned into what the speaker is saying. You're not just repeating sounds, you're trying to copy their intonation, rhythm, emphasis. It forces you to pay attention on multiple levels.
Wow, that's a lot to process. It's like a brain workout. And I could see how that would lead to better pronunciation and a deeper understanding of, how English is actually spoken.
It's a really powerful technique. And it can be a bit tough at first, but the podcast hosts argue that stepping outside your comfort zone is where real growth happens.
True. That makes me think about one of the biggest hurdles for language learners thinking in English. It's so easy to translate everything back and forth in your head, which can slow you down.
Oh, they talk about that too. And they give some good strategies for training your brain to think directly in English, which can be a game changer for fluency.
I bet. Because once you think in English, everything else, like speaking, listening, even writing, becomes so much easier, right?
It definitely does. And I think the tips they share on this are some of the most valuable in the whole episode. But before we get into that, maybe we should talk about another common concern for English learners. Grammar.
Ah, yes, the dreaded grammar rules. It can be so overwhelming, especially English grammar, which can get pretty complex.
Yeah.
But the podcast, they seem to have a more relaxed approach. They're not saying to ignore grammar altogether, are they?
Not at all. They acknowledge that grammar is important, but they encourage learners to not get too bogged down by it, especially at the beginning.
So finding that balance between learning the rules and actually using the language.
Exactly. They suggest learning grammar more organically through context rather than just memorizing a bunch of rules from a textbook.
Makes sense. It's like learning to play an instrument. You need to know the basics, but you really learn by playing music, not just by studying theory.
Exactly. They even recommend finding resources that explain grammar in a fun, conversational way instead of just dry textbooks.
I like that. That's great advice. But learning a language isn't all about studying alone, right? There's a social side, too. And the podcast, they really highlight the importance of community.
For sure. They're big believers in connecting with other English speakers, both online and offline.
Yeah, I can see the benefits. Having that community can provide support, motivation, and make you feel like you belong.
And it's a great way to get feedback on your progress and learn from other people's experiences. It can really help keep you going, especially when you hit those bumps in the road.
So finding your tribe is just as important as finding the right methods. And I think that brings us to their next point, setting goals and tracking your progress. Language learning can feel like a long road, right? How do we stay on track and motivated?
Well, that's where setting clear goals and actually keeping track of your progress comes in. The podcast hosts are really strong on the idea that having specific, measurable goals is crucial. It's like having a roadmap for your language journey.
I like that. A roadmap. But goal setting can be tough. Where do you even begin?
Well, I think they have some really practical advice on that, and I'm excited to share it. But first, I'm curious, what's standing out to you so far from this deep dive? What's resonating with you?
That's a good question. We've covered a lot already, from immersion and active listening to the power of community and the importance of goals. But there's still so much more to explore. So stay with us as we continue to unpack the English Fluency Show and discover even more valuable insights on how to take your English skills to the next level.
So, as we dig into this goal setting thing, the podcast, they make a really interesting point. It's not just about setting any goal. It's about setting ones that, really matter to you.
Okay, so not a one-size-fits-all kind of thing.
Right. They say that if your goals aren't meaningful to you personally, you're probably not going to stick with them.
Makes sense.
So, if you're learning English mostly for work, your goals might be, about giving presentations or talking in meetings confidently.
Yeah.
But if you're learning for travel, your goals might be more about getting around, having those everyday conversations with people.
I see. So it's about finding that personal connection to your language learning. But how do we actually go about setting those goals? What's worked for you?
Well, one thing I found is breaking down those big goals into smaller steps.
Okay, yeah.
It's just less overwhelming that way.
Right.
And you get those little wins along the way, which can really help with motivation. And the podcast, they suggest something similar. They talk about tracking your progress, even those small wins to stay motivated.
Yeah, because it's easy to get discouraged if you're only looking at that final goal way off in the distance. Celebrating those little milestones can make a big difference. And speaking of celebrating, I love how the podcast emphasizes finding joy in the process, you know, not just making it a chore.
Oh, for sure. They say that if you're not enjoying it, you're probably going to quit. And honestly, learning a language can be tough, so might as well make it as fun as possible.
Right, I agree. And they suggest some fun stuff, like watching comedies in English.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, to pick up on humor and cultural things, but also just have a good laugh. You're learning without realizing it.
Exactly. And they talk about the benefits of laughter, right? Reduces stress, improves your mood, just
Yeah.
makes the whole thing more enjoyable.
It's win-win.
Uh-oh.
And they have other cool ideas too, like playing language games or learning through music. I mean, think about it. How many times have you had a song stuck in your head and it's in another language?
All the time.
That melody, it just helps the words stick, you know?
It's true. Music really has that power, right? It connects with our emotions and makes things more memorable. And there's so many ways to use music, whether it's singing along, translating lyrics, or even writing your own songs in English.
I love that. It's all about getting creative, finding what personally connects with you. But
Yeah.
even with all those fun ideas, there are going to be times when language learning feels like, well, work. What does the podcast say about dealing with those slumps?
One thing they emphasize is patience. They remind listeners that it's not a race, it's a marathon. You'll hit those plateaus, there'll be setbacks, and that's okay.
So true.
Yeah.
It's easy to compare ourselves to others and get frustrated if we're not like progressing as fast as we think we should be.
Right.
But as they say, everyone's journey is different. And the key is to just keep going.
Exactly. And that's where that growth mindset comes in again, right? Believing that you can get better, even when it's tough, is crucial. Then talk about embracing mistakes as opportunities to learn and focusing on the progress you have made rather than dwelling on what you haven't mastered yet.
Yeah, it's about perspective, right? Seeing those challenges as part of the journey, not as roadblocks. And I think that applies to way more than just language learning.
Absolutely. It's a life skill for sure. And speaking of life skills, I think their advice on thinking in English is one of the most valuable things in this whole episode.
Okay, let's get into that. They touched on it before, but I'm curious to hear more about how to train your brain to think in a new language. It almost sounds like a superpower.
Right. And it's really not as hard as you might think. They suggest starting small, simple things like describing your surroundings in English or asking yourself questions throughout the day, all in English.
So it's about integrating English into those little everyday moments, almost like narrating your life in your head.
Yeah, exactly. And they say do it consistently. The more you practice, the easier it gets. It's like building a mental muscle.
I love that. So creating those pathways in your brain, making those connections stronger. And I can see how that would help with everything else, speaking, listening, writing. If you're already thinking in English, it all becomes more natural and fluid, right?
It does. It's like taking away that translation step and experiencing the language directly. And it's interesting because this thinking in English, it connects back to that immersion idea we talked about earlier.
Oh, I see it. You're surrounding yourself with English, even in your thoughts, so you're kind of immersing yourself on a deeper level.
Exactly. And it's not just passive exposure, it's actively engaging your mind with the language. It's about making English part of your inner world,
Like you're shifting your mental landscape so English just feels more natural and comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
That's got to be huge for fluency. But as we wrap up this episode, what's that one big takeaway you want our listeners to remember? What's that golden nugget they can take away?
That's a good question. And I think the most important message is that fluency is possible for anyone who's willing to put in the work and find the joy in it. It's not about being perfect. It's about embracing the journey and celebrating those small victories along the way.
I love that. It's hopeful and encouraging. It reminds us that language learning is an adventure, full of challenges and discoveries, but ultimately it's about that feeling of accomplishment. Wow, it's amazing how much we got out of just one episode of the English Fluency Show. They really gave us a whole toolbox for, improving our English. But before we finish up, I want to go back to something you mentioned earlier about finding what works best for you.
Yeah, that's so important. There's no one right way to learn a language. What works for me might not work for you. And the podcast, they really encourage people to just experiment and find what clicks for them.
Like they're saying, forget those rigid textbook methods. It's about finding something more personal, more intuitive.
Exactly. It's about being curious, trying different things and seeing what gets you excited about learning, which actually brings us back to that whole idea of having fun with the process.
Right. Because let's be honest, if you're dreading your English practice, you're probably not going to stick with it.
Makes sense.
But if you're actually enjoying it, well, you're going to be way more motivated.
Right. It's a simple idea, but it's powerful, and it gives so many good suggestions for making it fun. We talked about comedies, games, music, but there are so many other ways to make it enjoyable.
It's about finding what you love and figuring out how to connect it to English. Like if you love to cook, try following recipes in English.
Yeah.
Or if you're a movie buff, watch a film in English with subtitles.
Exactly. It's about those creative connections between your interests and, your goals for learning English.
And that's a great point to end on. It's not about forcing yourself into a box. It's about finding what works and, making the language your own.
Totally. It's about embracing the journey, enjoying those little wins, and ultimately finding that joy in becoming a more fluent speaker.
And who knows? Maybe you'll discover some hidden talents or passions along the way.
Absolutely. Learning a language can open so many doors, right? It's a chance to connect with people from all over the world, explore different cultures, and really broaden your horizons.
It's a gift that keeps on giving. So to our listeners, we encourage you to take what we've talked about today and use it in your own language journey. Experiment, explore, and most importantly, have fun with it.
And remember, fluency is a journey, not a destination. Embrace the challenges, enjoy the wins, and never stop learning.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive. We hope you enjoyed this exploration of the English Fluency Show and that you've picked up some useful tips and inspiration for your own language learning. Until next time, happy learning.
Ever feel like you understand English, you really get it, but when it comes to actually speaking, it's like, trying to talk underwater.
Yeah.
Like you just can't quite get the words out.
It's so common.
So many people feel that way, and we are diving into a podcast episode that's all about this. It's called Unlocking Your Voice, Overcoming the Barrier to Speaking English. And it's really interesting because it actually gets into the science of how we learn and why speaking can feel so different from just, understanding.
Yeah, it makes a really cool distinction right at the beginning about passive versus active skills. When you're absorbing English by listening or reading,
Right.
that's passive.
Yeah.
Your brain's just kind of taking it in.
Yeah.
But when you have to speak English, that flips a switch in your brain.
Oh, yeah.
Now you have to actively formulate and structure and produce the language.
Oh, it's work.
It's totally different.
It's like watching those baking shows all day long.
Right.
You can watch them, but it doesn't make you a baker.
Exactly.
You have to actually get in there and, get your hands dirty.
You got to get your hands dirty. That's where the episode goes deep into the science behind it.
Okay.
It's not just about knowing the words. It's about training your brain to actually use them, in real time.
Yeah, which takes practice.
Exactly. Active practice.
Okay, so that's the why, and that makes total sense. But what about the how?
Right.
What do we actually do to get over this hurdle? The episode gives some really interesting strategies. One that stood out to me was this thing called shadowing.
Oh, yeah.
Which sounds kind of mysterious.
It's actually really cool.
Yeah.
So imagine you're listening to a native speaker.
Okay.
And you're instantly mimicking them, almost like an echo.
Oh, wow.
You're trying to match their pronunciation, their rhythm, their intonation.
Oh, that's a good idea.
It's like language karaoke.
Yeah, I like that.
Where you're training your mouth and your brain to work together in this new way.
So it's not about memorizing phrases or anything like that.
Right.
It's more about just getting comfortable with the sounds.
Exactly. It's about building those muscle memory pathways.
Oh, I see.
Getting comfortable with the sounds and the flow of English.
Okay, and the episode brings up how we learned our first language.
Yeah.
Babies don't start with grammar textbooks.
No, they don't.
They just start babbling.
They learn by mimicking, experimenting, just trying things out.
Totally.
And shadowing is tapping into that innate ability that we all have.
To just absorb it.
Yes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of things that we already do, what about that self-talk strategy that the episode mentioned? It seems really practical.
Absolutely. Especially if you're not surrounded by English speakers all the time.
Right, exactly.
Self-talk is about weaving English into your everyday life.
Okay.
So you're basically narrating your actions, your thoughts, even your feelings in English.
Oh, fun.
Like imagine you're cooking dinner. Instead of just silently chopping veggies, you're thinking and saying things like, all right, time to dice these tomatoes. Maybe I'll add some basil too.
So you're talking to yourself in English.
Exactly. You're tuning your inner monologue into a practice session.
Oh, that's a good idea.
You're getting comfortable thinking and expressing yourself in English without the pressure of an audience.
I like that. Okay, those strategies both seem doable. But what if you actually want to, talk to someone? Does the episode talk about how to find opportunities, especially if you're not living in an English-speaking country?
It does.
Yeah.
And it really reassures listeners that even without constant access to native speakers, there are tons of ways to get that speaking practice in.
Okay.
So think about language exchange apps like Tandem or HelloTalk.
I've heard of those.
Yeah, where you can connect with people all over the world.
Cool.
There are online communities buzzing with people eager to practice English. And hey, even your friendly neighborhood AI can be a good conversation partner.
Wait, you're saying talking to Siri or Alexa actually counts as practice?
The episode makes a great point. It's obviously not a substitute for a real human interaction.
Right.
But using voice assistants forces you to articulate your thoughts and, get those English-speaking muscles working.
Yeah.
And let's be real. Sometimes it's just less intimidating to, stumble over a word in front of a bot.
Than a person, for sure.
Yeah,
totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's all about building that confidence.
Yes.
And the episode seems to really emphasize speaking before you're ready. What's the thinking behind that?
It's about breaking free from that perfectionist trap that so many learners get stuck in.
Yeah.
Where you're like, I'll speak when I'm fluent, when I know every grammar rule.
When I sound perfect.
Yeah, when I sound like a native speaker.
Right.
But the thing is, fluency isn't a destination. It's a journey.
That's true.
And sometimes the best way to learn is to just dive in.
So it's more like speak as you're ready.
He said it.
Knowing that you're going to make mistakes, and that's part of the process.
Yes. Embrace the messiness.
I like that. Okay, so embrace the messiness. Got it. But how do we get from those first fumbles to actually speaking with, some level of smoothness? Did the episode get into how often you need to actually practice to see real progress?
It did.
Yeah.
And it emphasized consistency is key. So the episode suggests aiming for at least 15 to 30 minutes of dedicated speaking practice every day.
Okay.
And they gave a really motivating estimate, too. They said that with that kind of commitment, you could be having, noticeably smoother, more confident conversations in just a few months.
A few months. That feels achievable.
Right.
It's like anything else.
It is.
If you put in the time, you're going to get the results.
Exactly.
But how do you actually make that time for practice when life gets so busy?
Well, they had some really creative suggestions, actually, like turning everyday activities into little practice sessions.
Okay.
Instead of just passively listening to music,
Right.
try singing along to English songs.
Ooh. Ooh, fun.
It's a fun way to work on your pronunciation and rhythm.
That's a good idea.
Or if you're a podcast fan,
Yeah.
challenge yourself to summarize an episode out loud in English afterwards.
Ooh, I like those ideas. Sneaking in the practice without even realizing it.
Exactly.
But what about when you just feel stuck? Like you know you should be speaking, but the fear creeps in and you just clam up.
Totally.
The episode talked about fear being a big blocker. Did they offer any strategies for dealing with those nerves?
They did.
Yeah.
And it really comes down to reframing how you think about fear.
Okay.
Remember learning to ride a bike?
Oh, yeah.
Think back to those early wobbles and falls.
Oh, absolutely. My knees still have scars to prove it.
Scary at first, right?
Yeah.
But eventually something clicked. You
What?
found your balance.
Yeah.
And that fear transformed into this sense of freedom.
Freedom and exhilaration.
Yeah.
Totally.
And the episode suggests approaching speaking English with that same mindset.
Okay.
You know, those initial stumbles and fumbles.
Yeah.
They're not failures. They're stepping stones.
So it's like shifting from I'm afraid of making mistakes to like I'm excited about the progress I'm making, even if it's messy.
Exactly. And that's where celebrating those small victories becomes so important. Each word you speak, each sentence you construct, each conversation you attempt, those are all wins.
They are.
Acknowledge them. Be proud of them. Let them fuel your motivation.
It's like building any new skill, right?
Yeah.
It takes the time, the effort, the consistency.
But the payoff is huge.
It is. You
Yeah.
start to feel empowered, like, hey, I can actually do this.
And the beautiful thing is that with language learning, it opens up a whole new world for you.
It does.
You can connect with people from different cultures. You can explore new ideas, express yourself in ways you never thought possible.
It's like unlocking a door to a whole universe
It is.
of new experiences and connections.
Yeah.
But sometimes, even with all that motivation in the world, life just gets in the way.
For sure.
So how do you keep that momentum going when you're juggling work and family and all the things? Did the episode have any advice on like staying committed to your speaking practice?
They stress the importance of finding a routine that works for you and building in some accountability.
Okay.
So they suggested setting realistic goals, like committing to just 15 minutes a day and then gradually increase it as you feel more confident.
Okay.
They also recommended finding a language partner or joining a speaking group,
Yeah.
to keep you motivated and accountable.
That makes a lot of sense. Having that support system can make a huge difference.
It can.
But what about when you just feel discouraged? Like you're not making progress as quickly as you want to.
Yeah,
Did the episode offer any advice for those moments of doubt?
it did. And it highlighted the importance of patience and self-compassion.
Oh, that's so important.
Language learning is a journey, not a race.
It is.
There will be ups and downs, moments of frustration, times when you just want to give up.
Yeah.
But it's crucial to remember that every learner progresses at their own pace.
So be kind to yourself.
Yes,
Celebrate those wins and trust that with effort you'll get there.
absolutely. And remember, you're not alone on this journey.
Yeah.
You know millions of people around the world are learning English.
That's true.
They're facing similar challenges. They're experiencing those same triumphs.
It's a community.
It is. Connect with other learners, share your experiences, support each other.
Yeah.
There's a whole community out there cheering you on.
That's so important. Knowing that you're part of something bigger.
It is.
A community of people all going for the same goal.
It's incredibly motivating.
Yeah, it is. And it brings us back to that core message of the episode.
Speak before you're ready.
Speak before you're ready.
Embrace the messiness, the imperfections, the stumbles along the way.
Because that's where the learning happens.
That's where the real learning happens.
It's about finding your voice, even if it's shaky at first.
Yes.
It's about taking those small steps day by day and trusting that they'll lead you where you want to go.
And sometimes the most powerful moments of growth come from stepping outside of our comfort zones
Totally.
and embracing those challenges.
Like that quote, the magic happens outside of your comfort zone.
Exactly. And when it comes to speaking English, that magic can be truly transformative. Think about your own experiences with language learning. What were some of the challenges you faced early on?
Oh, so many. I remember being so self-conscious about my accent, and I would just stumble over words and just feel like I was in over my head.
It's funny how those early struggles can feel so big at the time, but then you look back and they're just part of the journey. What about you? What were some of the things that really stuck out for you?
I think for me, it was that fear of sounding stupid in front of native speakers.
Yeah.
Like I would just overthink everything and get so tongue-tied and end up just avoiding conversation.
Oh, the perfectionist trap.
Yeah.
So common. But the episode really encourages us to flip that script.
Okay.
They're saying that making mistakes is actually a sign of progress.
Oh.
It's a sign that you're pushing yourself. You're stretching those language muscles.
So instead of seeing them as failures, you see them as opportunities.
Exactly. Opportunities to learn and grow.
Learn and grow. I like that.
And the more you allow yourself to make those mistakes,
Yeah.
the quicker you'll learn and improve.
So shifting the mindset from fear to curiosity,
Yes.
from self-judgment to self-compassion.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And the episode makes a really good point that shift in perspective can actually make the learning process more enjoyable.
Oh, for sure.
When you're not so worried about being perfect,
Yeah.
you can relax and have fun with it.
Totally. Because it shouldn't be a chore.
You shouldn't.
It should be an adventure.
It should be fun.
Yeah.
And the episode really emphasizes that learning to speak English isn't just about, grammar rules and vocabulary.
It's about connecting.
It's about connecting with people,
Yeah.
sharing experiences, broadening your horizons.
So opening yourself up to new possibilities.
Yes. New perspectives, new friendships even.
Exactly. And the episode ends on such an inspiring note. It reminds us that everyone has a story to tell.
Everyone.
And the world's waiting to hear it.
The world is waiting.
And it doesn't matter what your background is or where you come from, your voice matters.
Your voice matters.
And learning to speak English can help unlock that voice.
It's the key.
And help you share it with the world.
Share with the world. So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's bring it back to you, our listener. What resonated most with you from this episode? What sparked your curiosity?
And most importantly, what's one small step you can take today to move closer to that goal of speaking English more confidently? Maybe it's downloading that language exchange app you've been thinking about, or committing to 5 minutes of self-talk every morning while you're getting ready.
Whatever it is, take that step. Raise your voice and unlock that incredible potential that lies within you. Because truly, everyone has a story to tell, and the world is waiting to hear yours.